There are silences that don't arise from the absence of words, but from the cessation of an old effort. A kind of weariness so discreet that no one notices when it begins, but whose depth is only recognized when there is no turning back. It is the moment when a woman awakens to a kind of inner sovereignty that doesn't need to be proclaimed. It's not a gesture, not a rational decision, nor a visible rebellion. It's an internal shift, almost imperceptible, that changes the axis of existence, from the external gaze to the internal one. And this movement, though silent, has the force of a contained earthquake. From the outside, it seems like withdrawal, a cold retreat, perhaps a hardening. But what manifests as distance is, in fact, birth. The birth of a presence that no longer bows to the expectations of others. It is at this point that so many become confused. Friends, partners, family, all interpret this quietude as loss when in fact it is liberation. What dies is the need to justify oneself. What is born is the right to simply be. Carl Jung said that there are times when the soul, tired of playing roles that don't belong to it, calls back its projections and turns inward, like a wounded animal seeking its cave. The return is painful, but inevitable. Within this silent retreat, the awakened woman perceives something that has always been there, the burden of explaining herself. From an early age, she learned that her presence needed a reason, that her emotions should be presented as arguments, that her silence was suspicious if it wasn't accompanied by a justification. She grew up translating herself, a language of the soul transformed into social language. Imagine a girl who laughs loudly and then seeks the gaze of adults to check if she has been allowed to feel joy. A girl who learns to soften her pain with explanatory phrases, who learns to contain her spontaneity to fit the delicacy expected of her. This girl grows up and her laughter becomes a measure, her sadness a narrative, her existence a justification. Every emotion needs to be accompanied by a footnote. Every decision needs to be supported by consensus. And so, little by little, the center of gravity of the soul shifts from the self to the gaze of the other. Jung would call this state an adapted life, an existence shaped by collective complexes that replace authenticity with acceptance. And when the spirit finally begins to awaken, the first symptom is exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but a subtle exhaustion that comes from the constant translation of the self. It's the kind of fatigue that doesn't heal with rest, because it arises from the attempt to be understood all the time, the effort to explain what, in essence, never fit into words. There comes a moment then, when the body refuses. The soul, saturated, decides to interrupt the flow. The woman who awakens doesn't make an announcement, she simply stops. And this stopping is revolutionary. She stops justifying, stops translating, stops offering unrestricted access to her inner world. The gesture is so simple that it goes unnoticed, but in silence an inner empire begins to rise again. Others notice. Some are bothered. They say she's changed, that she's closed herself off, that she's not so sweet anymore. And perhaps they're right. She has changed, but she hasn't closed herself off. She's simply occupied her own space. She hasn't become cold. She's simply stopped warming others at her own expense. What was once generosity has become self-abandonment. What was once transparency has become exposure. And now, finally, she understands the difference. Jung reminded us that the individuation process demands an inevitable break with the collective gaze. It is necessary to endure misunderstanding. The woman who awakens is seen as distant because she no longer offers the same narrative about herself. And yet, it is in this silence that she approaches her truth. The solitude that arises is not punishment, it is the journey. The external noise begins to dissolve, and what remains is the almost inaudible sound of the soul breathing on its own. But there is fear, there always is. Because when a woman stops justifying herself, she confronts the void left by explanations. The space that was once occupied by words is now filled with mystery, the same mystery that the world fears because it cannot be controlled. The feminine, in its deepest expression, is the territory of the unspeakable, and the unspeakable, when it returns, is frightening. Awakening doesn't happen in an explosion but in small negations. A no said without guilt, an unexplained absence, a look that doesn't seek approval. They are minimal gestures, but each one is a step out of the invisible prison of conditioning. The woman begins to realize that there is nothing to prove, that her value is not in the echo she provokes, but in the silent vibration of her own presence. Jung spoke of the self as the regulating center of the psyche, a totality that calls each scattered part back home. That is exactly what happens here. The feminine soul gathers the fragments of itself scattered in opinions, judgments, and roles. The return is slow, sometimes painful, because each fragment carries the weight of a past concession. But there is a tenderness in this process. The reunion with that which never ceased to exist, only had been forgotten. Suddenly the world seems quieter, not because the voices have ceased, but because they no longer penetrate so deeply. The woman realizes that the noise actually came from within, from the urgency to be understood. Now that urgency dissolves. In its place, a serenity is born that doesn't need to be displayed. It's a form of wisdom that doesn't explain, it simply radiates. The surroundings react. Some distance themselves, unable to cope with the new rhythm. Others try to win her back, asking for the approachable woman she once was. But she can no longer be that. Something has closed, and at the same time, something immense has opened. Jung would call this moment a return to the center, when the ego bows before the totality and recognizes that it was never the master of the house, only a temporary guest. What begins here is a process of no return. The woman realizes she no longer needs to ask permission to exist in silence. And this silence, so often misinterpreted, is the highest form of sovereignty. There is no drama, no resentment, only the tranquil acceptance that what does not resonate does not need to be maintained. And then a question arises, still timid, but inevitable. If I don't need to justify myself, what remains? What am I when I cease to be what others expect to see? The echo of this question resonates in the darkness like an ancient call, a call that comes from a place before language, before even memory. It is the call of the self, Jung's invitation to the integration of the shadow, to the reconciliation between what has been shown and what has been hidden. The woman feels fear, but she also feels power, a power that doesn't dominate but merely sustains, a power that doesn't shine but illuminates. And at that point, silence ceases to be absence. It becomes pure presence, because true awakening is not noise, it is return. And while the world tries to understand what has changed, she has already crossed the first threshold. Behind her, the sound of her old habit of explaining herself still echoes. Ahead, a silent vastness calls to her by name, a name no one else knows, but one she is beginning little by little to remember. And it is precisely at this threshold, between what dies and what is born, that the journey begins. But what comes after this silence will be the beginning of what has always been waiting to be voiced. There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It simply repeats itself silently, until one day, it becomes unbearable. It is the pain of carrying what doesn't belong to us. Many women upon spiritual awakening realize they have spent a good part of their lives trying to save others from their own shadow, not out of vanity, nor out of neediness, but out of love. A misunderstood love, shaped by centuries of renunciation and devotion. From an early age, they learned that being good meant alleviating the pain of others, even if it cost them their own peace. Helping became instinct, healing, a vocation. And yet, beneath this almost sacred sweetness, an invisible prison hid. Carl Jung said that no human gesture is purely conscious. Behind every excessive kindness, there is an unseen shadow, an unconscious motive trying to redeem something lost. The woman who lives to save others doesn't realize that deep down, she's trying to rescue a forgotten part of herself. That little girl who once wanted to be loved because she was needed, to be the support, the shelter, the comfort. How many times, without realizing it, does she become the harbor for storms that aren't her own? Imagine her on a typical morning. She wakes up before everyone else, makes coffee, organizes the day, prepares everything necessary so that no one stumbles. She smiles, listens, understands. Sometimes she feels a knot in her chest, but she hides it. When someone cries, she comforts them. When someone makes a mistake, she understands. When someone is silent, she fills the void. And yet, when night falls, her body feels heavy. There is no apparent cause for the exhaustion, just a feeling of being drained from the inside. It's the invisible price of being the world's emotional refuge. Jung saw in this behavior a distortion of the great mother archetype, the one who gives birth, nurtures, and protects. In balance, this archetype is a source of life, but when wounded, it transforms into compulsion, the impulse to heal others at the expense of oneself. The woman begins to confuse empathy with obligation. She She feels responsible for saving others. She carries guilt that is not hers, wounds she did not experience, silences she did not choose. And the cruelest thing is that she believes she is doing good. There's a scene that repeats itself in many lives. She gets involved with someone who is always on the brink of collapse, an emotionally unstable partner, a friend who never matures, a family member who constantly needs rescuing. She believes that if she loves him enough, he will change. But the more she envelops him in her light, the more the other person gets used to the brightness without learning to ignite it within themselves. Love, which should liberate, begins to imprison. The woman becomes the pillar that supports the other's pain, and without realizing it, exhausts herself trying to contain a collapse that is not hers. And there is always a guilt, an inner voice inherited from generations that whispers, "If you don't stay, they will be lost." It is the echo of an ancient conditioning, the ghost of women who believed that caring was synonymous with existing. Jung reminded us that guilt is often the shadow of freedom, the price we pay for breaking with the old. Thus, when a woman decides to relinquish the role of savior, she feels she is betraying her own nature. But in truth, she is only returning to life what never belonged to her to carry. There comes a moment when lucidity arrives, and she realizes the truth she has always avoided. No one can save someone who refuses to look at their own darkness. And worse, in trying to save them, she prevents the other from discovering their own strength. It's as if she places herself between the other person and the chance to find their own path. Distorted love then reveals itself as a subtle form of control. The awakened soul is ashamed of this, not out of malice, but because she realizes how much she confused compassion with fear. The fear of seeing the other suffer, the fear of being called cold, the fear of no longer being needed. These are old fears, inherited from a childhood where being the responsible one was the only way to guarantee love. How many times did she hear, "You're so mature, you're the one who understands, you're the one who can handle it." And so, the burden became her identity. But then comes the moment when the body begins to say, enough. Not with words, but with symptoms. Anxiety without cause, persistent insomnia, a dull sadness that no explanation can resolve. It is the soul asking for its return, and when it finally stops, everything around it falls apart. Those who have always depended on its strength feel betrayed. They accuse it of selfishness, of indifference. For a moment, it almost believes them. But there is something different this time, a silent center that refuses to retreat. Jung would say it is the self-emerging, reclaiming the territory of the soul. It is the point at which the woman understands that her duty is not to hold up the world, but to remain whole within it, that her healing presence is not born of sacrifice, but of integrity, that helping someone is not about preventing their fall, but about offering witness while learning to get up. There's a symbolic night in this process, and almost all of them go through it. It's the night when, for the first time, she says no. No to drama, no to manipulation, no to the role of martyr. And the no, so simple, sounds like an earthquake. The silence that follows is dense. Her heart races, her hands tremble, but paradoxically, there is relief. For the first time, she feels the weight of the other person slide to the ground, and in place of exhaustion, space emerges. A new emptiness which at first frightens, then breathes. In everyday life, this might seem trivial, not responding to a message that demands too much, not intervening in someone else's argument, allowing someone to deal with the consequences of their own mistake. But internally, it's a revolution. It's the archetype of the savior being undone. It's the woman saying, even without words, "I trust that you can bear your pain." And this trust, which seems like detachment, is the greatest act of love possible. The most paradoxical thing is that, by ceasing to save, she finally begins to love. Because true love is not rescue, it is witness. It is remaining present without losing oneself. It is looking at the suffering of others and recognizing, this is your dark night and I respect your right to go through it. And in this silent gesture, something profound is reorganized. Jung taught that individuation is not solitude, but integration. The woman who stops seeking redemption enters a kind of solitude that is not empty. It is full. She no longer needs to be exhausted to feel alive. She no longer needs the drama of others to justify her sensitivity. And when, by chance, someone asks her for help, she no longer responds hastily. She breathes. She observes. She offers presence, not salvation. This new state is strange at first. There's a void where there was once urgency, a stillness where there was once chaos. Sometimes she feels out of place, as if she's forgotten the language the world speaks. But with time, she discovers a new way of connecting, quieter, more genuine. People who once approached out of neediness now distance themselves, and others, more whole, begin to appear. Relationships cease to be refugees and become encounters. There is something sacred about this transition. It's as if the soul finally breathes without interference. And in the mirror, she sees a version of herself she didn't know. Not a weary heroine, but a serene woman. The glow that once came from effort now comes from peace. And when someone tries to pull her back to her old role, she simply smiles. Because she understands that rescuing the other was, at its core, an attempt to escape her own depth. Now she is willing to descend, to face her own darkness without intermediaries, without an audience. And it is in this dive that she finds what Jung called the luminous center of the shadow, the point where self-love and love for the other cease to be opposites. There is no more guilt, only a silent understanding. Each soul has its own path, and trying to spare it the journey is to deny it the chance to become whole. The woman who awakens does not abandon love, she merely purifies it. And it is when she finally lets go of the burden that wasn't hers that the true miracle happens. The lightness doesn't come from escaping, but from returning. The silence of part 1 now expands. It is the prelude to something greater, a force that begins to be born from within, discreet but irreversible. And on the horizon, the third transformation approaches like an omen, the moment when she will stop asking to be chosen. In her newfound solitude, something begins to stir within, an almost imperceptible movement, yet so profound that it alters the rhythm of her breathing. For the first time, she finds herself without the voices that once told her who she should be. The house is silent, the phone doesn't ring, and the mirror no longer reflects the image of a woman molded to please. In this emptiness, there is vertigo, but there is also truth. What was once absence begins to reveal itself as space, the space necessary for something authentic to emerge. Carl Jung stated that all individuation is born from a rupture. Breaking with the external mirror is one of the most painful. Throughout her life, this woman sought the reflection that would confirm her existence. The gaze that would say, "I see you," the voice that would whisper, "You are enough." But this reflection never came in its entirety, and what she called love, recognition, or admiration were often just brief flashes, pieces of borrowed light. Now, without these reflections, she perceives the darkness, and in this darkness, the true encounter with herself begins. But what happens when the mirror shatters? When the applause ceases, when the gaze of another no longer defines the contours of the soul? There is a moment of panic, almost a feeling of death. The old self, sustained by approval and expectations, begins to dissolve. And it is then that the question no one wants to ask arises: who am I when nobody's watching? For years, she lived according to that gaze, the gaze of her partner, her mother, her boss, her friends. She dressed not for pleasure, but for impact. She spoke carefully, anticipating what would be well received. She shaped her opinions, gestures, even her silences, so as not to be misinterpreted. She created a version of herself so strategically constructed that her original essence was buried under layers of convenience. Jung called this the persona, the necessary social mask, but dangerous when we forget that it is only a part. The awakened woman realizes her life has been a long performance, and this realization is devastating. It's like discovering the stage was empty the whole time, and the audience distracted. The applause I sought was for a role, not for the soul. The disillusionment is so profound it feels like ruin, and it is. But ruins are also portals. Among the rubble of the old self, there is something alive that breathes for the first time without asking permission. At this point, many try to go back. They instinctively seek the old mirror, a compliment, a confirmation, a look of approval. But the reflection no longer gives anything back. The mechanism of external validation loses its effect, like a drug that the body has learned to reject. And faced with the emptiness, the woman feels the urge to flee to work, to a new relationship, to any form of distraction. But the emptiness persists. It is the self calling her back, demanding that the mirror be internal. Is it possible to truly look at oneself without needing to be admired? Is it possible to exist without needing to be seen? These questions pierce her like knives. They are questions that don't demand an immediate answer, only the courage to remain with them. There's always one day, there always is, when she wakes up and realizes she doesn't feel the need to impress anyone. The feeling is strange, almost frightening, because the impulse to please was her compass. Now, without it, everything seems to lose direction. But little by little, the silence becomes familiar. She begins to notice the small things she previously ignored. The smell of coffee, the touch of the wind, her own breathing. It's as if the whole world, previously seen through the eyes of others, begins to reveal itself in her own eyes. In this new state, the body realigns itself. The gaze changes. She walks the streets without the burden of being observed, and it is in this instant that she realizes something surprising. When she stops seeking recognition, she becomes truly visible. The presence that once depended on approval now emanates from within. There is a quiet beauty in someone who no longer needs to be noticed to exist. But the path is full of traps. The old pattern tries to return in subtle disguises. The desire to prove one's own growth, to show that now things are different, to be admired for having awakened. The spiritual ego, Jung warned, is the most dangerous shadow, for it disguises itself as light. The woman who believed herself free may, without realizing it, become trapped again by the need for recognition, now no longer as the good girl, but as the conscious one. The trap is the same, it only changes form, and then a new revelation emerges. True freedom lies not in being seen, but in not needing to be understood. This realization is liberating, and at the same time, lonely. Those who have never lived for approval do not understand the depth of this rupture. It's like losing the language one has always spoken. One begins to feel like a stranger in one's own world, but for the first time, feels at home within oneself. What if the value of a life lay not in being recognized, but in being felt? What if the greatest applause was the inner silence that confirms, I exist and that is enough? There is a kind of rebirth that happens without witnesses. There are no spotlights, no pronouncements, just a different kind of stillness. The woman, who once sought confirmation in every glance, now finds peace in being invisible. And in this invisibility, she discovers herself whole. Jung said that, what you are needs to be brought to consciousness, otherwise it will manifest as destiny. By removing the mask of the persona, she ceases to be a character and becomes the protagonist again. In everyday life, this is revealed in small gestures. She speaks with pauses, acts without haste, chooses with serenity. She no longer needs to convince anyone of her worth. The simple fact of being present is enough, and it is at this point that something unexpected arises. People begin to notice her presence differently. It is no longer a noisy visibility, but a kind of silent magnetism. The world senses when someone has found their own center. But there is a curious paradox. The more self-sufficient she is, the more capable she becomes of loving. Because the love that springs from completeness does not imprison, does not demand reflection. It is a love that observes without projecting, welcomes without invading, offers without dissolving. It is the love that Jung associated with the integration of the mature feminine, the union between the light of consciousness and the depth of the soul. And then one last question arises, whispered like a challenge. Who will you be when even your inner mirror falls silent? This question doesn't bring fear, but curiosity. It's the harbinger of a new stage, a state beyond the search, where being and presence become synonymous. The woman no longer seeks confirmation, for she has become the source itself. With each breath, she reaffirms what she previously needed to hear from others. I am. What dissolves now is not just a pattern, but an entire identity. And in the space left by the old reflection, something is born that cannot be named. A quiet force, a lifeless glow. The awakening deepens. The mask falls. The soul begins to see the world with clear eyes. And for the first time, she doesn't want to be seen. She just wants to see. But what you will see, that for now, remains hidden on the next crossing. The answer doesn't arrive like a bolt of lightning, nor as a resounding revelation. It emerges gradually, like a whisper from the bottom of a lake. It's a certainty without origin, a knowledge that doesn't depend on reasoning or approval. Carl Jung said that individuation is, above all, an emptying, the liberation from the false identifications that imprison the being. For the woman in the process of awakening, this means letting go of the masks that sustained her survival, the one that pleases, the one that helps, the one that waits to be chosen. She doesn't do this out of arrogance, but out of vital necessity, because she perceives with almost physical lucidity that the soul can only grow when it stops bleeding energy in directions that never nourished it. At first, the silence seems dangerous. A space opens up, a strange vacuum where before there was the constant noise of searching, striving, and seeking approval. Daily life takes on a new texture. Conversations sound hollow. Old urgencies lose their meaning. The world seems to have lowered its volume. And paradoxically, it is in this emptiness that something begins to flourish. It's as if the soul, for the first time, has room to breathe. This emptiness is not death, it is germination. But those who have lived on the edge of excess fear emptiness, the woman, accustomed to emotional hyperactivity, feels she has lost her way. Her old compass, the gaze of others, has stopped working. Everything she learned about love, purpose, and value seems to dissolve in the face of this silence. And then comes the fear. What if nothing is waiting for me inside? What if all that remains is just an echo of what I once was? Doubt is necessary. Jung would say that the fear of emptiness is a reflection of the ego's resistance, unable to accept that meaning is not outside, but at the center. And little by little, this fear begins to transform into curiosity. She begins to observe her own silence attentively. Each time she resists the impulse to justify herself, a new thread of strength is formed. Each time she refuses the call to save someone, something within her reorganizes itself. Each time she feels the temptation to seek validation, and instead offers herself recognition, an invisible circuit closes. It is energy returning to its place of origin. But the process isn't linear. Some days, she wakes up serene, as if she'd already crossed the ocean. On others, she feels lost, as if the old pattern has returned with even more force. And it does return, because everything that has been nurtured for so long struggles to survive. The difference is that now she sees it. And when she sees it, the cycle begins to break. It's curious how the world reacts to silent transformation. People notice even if they can't explain it. There's something different in this woman's gaze. She speaks less, but each word carries a new weight. She walks slowly, but the air around her seems denser. Old friends drift away, not because of conflict, but because the old energy field that united them no longer exists. Bonds sustained by lack, need, or repetition simply dissolve. At first glance, it seems like loss. In truth, it's purification. And then a disturbing observation arises. Why does the void, which once seemed threatening, now reveal itself to be fertile? Could it be that meaning comes not from filling, but from pause? At this stage, something profoundly physiological happens. The body changes, sleep deepens, breathing slows, and the heartbeat harmonizes. The vital energy that previously dissipated in explanations, rescues, and efforts to be seen now circulates back to the center. There are reports of women who, after months of emotional exhaustion, begin to feel warmth in their hands, a subtle vibration in their chest, an expansion they cannot describe. This is not a miracle, but psychic physics. The energy that previously leaked out now accumulates, and the body, accustomed to exhaustion, needs to relearn how to contain vitality. Carl Jung called this the return of libido to the self, the gathering of creative force. It's a mysterious but real phenomenon. As a woman stops investing energy in external roles, the unconscious responds, sending symbols, dreams, and omens. Some report dreams of old houses being rebuilt, of calm oceans, of unknown children smiling. These dreams are messages from the center, announcing that the soul is reorganizing itself. But there is also resistance. On certain days, she misses the old chaos, the excitement of being needed, the comfort of being understood. The ego tries to negotiate, to offer compromises. Can I remain silent but without losing the affection of others? Can I be free but still please a little? These inner voices test the solidity of the new center. And even when she yields, she soon realizes each concession drains the energy she had just recovered. The learning process is rapid. What if true maturity were actually a return to simplicity? What if the ultimate purpose wasn't to conquer anything, but to unlearn what was never essential? Over time, the external world begins to reorganize itself. What seemed like loss reveals itself as selective expansion. It attracts new presences, People who don't demand, they simply coexist. Conversations become slower, but deeper. Social life, once noisy, is reduced to a few authentic connections. There is no loneliness in this. There is choice. A woman no longer needs to be everywhere, nor be everything to everyone. Each no, said serenely, is a seed of freedom. Jung described this state as the beginning of the symbolic life, when the individual begins to live no longer driven by duty but by meaning. The awakened woman becomes selective not out of vanity, but out of harmony. She only approaches what vibrates in tune with her inner truth. There is something almost scientific about this, as if her energy field, now adjusted, naturally repels what is not authentic. It is a form of invisible alchemy. What does not resonate disappears. Once, one of these women recounted that, after years of living in tumultuous relationships, she began to dream of a tree. At first, she only observed it from afar. Then, she began to sit in its shade. In her last dream, she realized that the tree was herself. The sap flowed from within. The trunk was firm. The leaves were silent. Upon waking, she felt an indescribable certainty. She no longer needed to chase after anything. She was complete. These revelations don't come in speeches or theories, but in subtle perceptions. The woman who once waited to be chosen now chooses, not out of vanity, but out of discernment. Her energy, once fragmented, becomes a compass. She knows without needing to explain when something vibrates with falsehood. She knows when a look is genuine or merely curious. She knows when a word nourishes or drains. And then something extraordinary happens. The silence ceases to be merely internal. It begins to alter the surrounding atmosphere. Agitated people calm down in her presence. Situations that were once chaotic seem to find order. It's as if the world responds to the frequency she emits. What Jung saw as synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, begins to manifest itself in small everyday wonders, improbable encounters, unexpected solutions, accurate premonitions. Life, once driven by effort, begins to flow through resonance. But the mystery remains. What if all this is just preparation for something bigger? What if this silence, so deeply inhabited, is the prelude to an even more profound calling? The woman doesn't know how to answer. She only feels that something inside her is beginning to awaken a new kind of curiosity, no longer directed towards the world, but towards the invisible things that sustain it. It's a faint premonition, like the wind before the rain, and it is at that moment, when she no longer seeks, no longer explains, no longer needs to be seen, that the true portal opens. Behind her lie the papers, the reflections, the echoes. Ahead, only the unknown. But this time, the unknown doesn't frighten. It's an invitation. It's a promise. It's the beginning of what Jung would call the union of opposites, the secret marriage between consciousness and mystery. And as she takes her first step into this new territory, she understands. The silence was not the end. It was the beginning of the word, and the verb now is creation. There are moments when transformation becomes visible even to those who don't understand its causes. Small gestures begin to carry new meanings. The way she enters a room, the silence she leaves between words, the calm with which she rejects what doesn't resonate with truth, all of this creates a different atmosphere. People notice, even without understanding. There's something about her that doesn't waver. The woman who once lived according to others' gaze now observes the world with an almost unsettling clarity. Carl Jung would call this symbolic perception, the vision that arises when the ego ceases to be a filter and the being begins to see directly from the self. In this new state, she feels what she previously only thought. It's no longer a rational analysis, but an instantaneous recognition. She perceives with precision who resonates with her essence and who approaches her only out of necessity. It's as if her body, once confused by so many concessions, has become a compass. She feels the weight of intentions, the imbalance of bonds, the discomfort that precedes false words. She doesn't react coldly, but with wisdom. The instinct to please, which previously kept her in harmful situations, is now replaced by a tranquil lucidity. There is no confrontation, only natural distancing. The false cannot withstand the field of the true. But the most surprising thing happens inside. A part of her, until then forgotten, begins to manifest itself. It's the inner child, the one who once feared abandonment and sought refuge in the approval of others. When the adult woman consciously chooses silence, this child reacts with panic. "You'll be forgotten," she whispers. "No one will look for you." Her heart races. The old loneliness returns, and for a moment everything seems to collapse. The woman feels the vertigo of old pain trying to reclaim space. It's the echo of childhood, when being alone meant being rejected. But now there's a difference. The woman no longer runs to distract herself. She breathes. She looks inward. She speaks to that small, frightened part of herself. "I am here. I haven't gone away. We are alone, but we are not abandoned." And in that simple gesture, something realigns. Each time she remains in this chosen solitude, a layer of the old fear dissolves. The emptiness begins to change temperature. It is no longer cold. It is vast. What if being alone wasn't a loss, but freedom? What if true abandonment was abandonment of oneself? Gradually, the inner child learns what no one taught her. That presence is not about quantity, but quality. That being loved is not about being possessed, but about being recognized. That solitude can be a home, not an exile. This learning is slow, almost invisible, but it changes everything. Automatic reactions cease. The body relaxes. The heart quiets. The woman discovers that she can be her own company, and this completely transforms her relationship with the world. There comes a moment, and it arrives without warning, when she realizes she no longer needs to consult anyone to make decisions. She no longer asks for opinions to validate her path. She is not guided by external rules. She does not seek approval for every step. She feels, decides, and follows. This self-sufficiency frightens those who still live trapped by the gaze of others, but in her, it is serenity. Jung said that this is the moment when the self takes the helm of the psyche, when the individual becomes the authority in their own life. This authority is not arrogance. It is stillness. It is not resistance. It is center. It can listen to criticism without falling apart. It can welcome advice without bowing down. It can disagree without losing love. Its stability comes from within, not from circumstances. It is as if, for the first time, its roots have reached the right soil, and that soil is its own being. But this newfound power comes with a test. One day, inevitably, something or someone tries to test her. It could be an old situation that returns, a relationship that reappears, a temptation disguised as a reunion. The universe seems to want to know if she has truly learned. The proposition is subtle. Do you still need to be recognized? Do you still need to save someone? Do you still need to justify your choice? The test is always the same, but with a different face. That night, alone, she feels the tension growing. Her whole body vibrates between the impulse to give in and the desire to remain true to herself. Memories come in a torrent. Old versions, old loves, applause that no longer echoes. For a moment, she almost returns. Almost. But then she remembers everything she has achieved. The silence, the wholeness, the center, and with a single gesture, the serene refusal, she breaks the last link. What happens next is impossible to explain. It's as if something opens up inside her, a clarity that comes neither from outside nor from within, but from a point without location. Everything becomes clearer. Time slows down. She feels her whole body vibrate at a new frequency. There are tears, but not of pain. They are tears of recognition. Something within her finally understands that freedom and love are not opposites. What if true love didn't require dependence? What if love was, above all, presence without possessiveness? Upon waking the next day, the world seems the same, but it isn't. The sounds are clearer, the air lighter, the colors more vibrant. She walks the streets with slow steps, and where there was once anxiety, there is only gratitude. Each breath is a discrete miracle. Strangers smile at her for no reason. Animals approach. Children look at her with curiosity. Something is radiating, and she realizes that what she sought in so many others now emanates naturally from within herself. Jung said that when the self begins to govern life, the external world responds in synchronicity. That which vibrates in harmony with the soul draws near. That which does not vibrate moves away. It is an invisible but precise principle. The woman notices improbable coincidences, unexpected reunions, solutions that arise effortlessly. Reality seems to respond to her new frequency. She understands, with a serenity that needs no expression, that nothing is separate. There is also a new perception regarding future generations. The daughters, the nieces, the girls who observe her, they all perceive something that cannot be taught with words. They see a woman who doesn't apologize for existing, who doesn't exhaust herself to deserve love, who doesn't depend on approval to feel whole. The mere presence of this woman is a lesson. It's a form of silent inheritance, but the true impact is invisible. The awakened woman transmits something that cannot be described, only felt. A kind of energy that breaks the cycle of inherited suffering. Future generations will not need to repeat the search, because one of them had the courage to stop. And it is at this point that the tension dissolves. Everything that was effort transforms into flow. Everything that was attempt transforms into certainty. It hasn't reached an end, it has reached a center. The wind changes. The air seems to hold a warning, a premonition. Something is yet to come, a deeper force, perhaps the final revelation. What she feels now is not fear, it is expectation. Something is calling from the other side of the known. And as the world seems to fall asleep around her, she closes her eyes and listens to the oldest sound in the universe, that of her own soul beginning to beat again. The cycle doesn't end here. It's about to transform into something even bigger. The journey is not over. It has only changed direction. Nothing learned so far can be taught through speeches. True teaching happens in the invisible realm, in the way the soul positions itself in the world. It is in small daily actions that the new manifests itself. When a woman sits and occupies her own space without shrinking, when she says no without a long explanation, when she moves away from what no longer fits without guilt, something transforms not only within her, but in the entire surrounding environment. These are silent gestures, almost imperceptible, but their echo crosses generations. Carl Jung said that every conscious act heals not only the individual, but the entire ancestral lineage that precedes them. And that is exactly what happens here. The past is redeemed by the simple fact that she exists fully in the present. Healing doesn't come in explosions. It arrives like a calm tide, dissolving patterns that seemed eternal. The woman who awakens realizes she no longer needs to be an example of effort or a martyr of kindness. She simply needs to be fully present. Her presence, once fragmented, becomes a source of harmony. She doesn't justify herself, doesn't try to convince, doesn't bend. She simply is. And in this being, she transmits something that no theory can reach, the possibility of living in peace with her own soul. When someone observes her, they may not understand the reason for her serenity, but they feel it. They feel the silent field of someone who no longer needs applause. There is a strength emanating from women who have reconciled with their own shadow. They don't shine ostentatiously, they radiate steadily. It's a stable light, almost discreet, but undeniable. And without realizing it, other women begin to mirror this vibration. Something awakens in them too. This is how the new world begins, not with noisy revolutions, but with whole presences. Every woman who stops justifying, rescuing, seeking approval sends a message to the collective unconscious. It is possible to be whole without sacrificing oneself. It is possible to love without disappearing. It is possible to be kind without losing one's own voice. But this understanding only becomes real when it is put into practice. Transformation doesn't happen in thought, it happens in action. Every day the invitation is the same. Observe when the impulse to explain oneself arises and instead remain silent. Perceive the desire to save someone and instead offer only presence. Acknowledge the need to be approved and, instead, turn inward, gently affirming, "I am enough." These small movements shape a new inner structure. Carl Jung called this the process of active individuation, the conscious experience of each choice that reaffirms the authentic self. It is neither a quick nor a linear path. It is full of returns, falls, and doubts. There will be days when the old pattern will seem stronger than ever. There will be nights when the silence will seem like loneliness. But it is precisely in these moments that learning solidifies. When she resists the temptation to retreat, the woman will perceive something subtle. The pain diminishes, the fear loses strength, and the inner center becomes firmer. What if true empowerment wasn't about winning, but about staying true to your own rhythm? What if spiritual maturity was the art of not betraying yourself? The awakened woman finally understands that there is nothing to conquer outside of herself. The love she sought, The recognition she hoped for, the security she longed for, all of this was hidden beneath the layers that are now falling away. The stillness that arises from this is not inertia, it is power. The power that doesn't need to be seen to exist. The power that is because it is. The most beautiful part of this journey is that it doesn't end in isolation. On the contrary, the more whole a woman becomes, the more she connects with the whole. Her relationships cease to be exchanges of neediness and become encounters of abundance. She no longer demands anything from others because she no longer demands perfection from herself. She learns to coexist without negating herself, to love without losing herself, to share without exhausting herself. Life, which was once a field of effort, transforms into a dance, and what once seemed impossible, the harmony between autonomy and love, becomes natural. Because true love, when it springs from within, neither imprisons nor corrects. It simply flows. It is the force that connects everything that exists, and now she feels it pulsing within herself. There comes a moment when she realizes something simple, yet grand. She is no longer a woman trying to awaken. She is awakening itself in motion. The energy that once sought masters, answers, and signs now transforms into a living presence. Consciousness has ceased to be a quest. It has become a state. What if the meaning of life were simply this, to allow consciousness to recognize itself through us? At that moment, everything aligns. The past loses its weight. The future ceases to be a threat. Only the now exists, vast, tranquil, luminous. The world remains the same, but she no longer sees it in the same way. Reality becomes an extension of her own being. The woman looks around and feels a profound respect for everything that exists. The pains, the losses, the choices, the silences. Everything made sense. Everything was the path. She understands then what Jung always pointed out, that true transformation is not about becoming something new, but about remembering who you always were. Beneath the masks, expectations, and fears, there has always been an intact essence silently observing. Now that essence returns to the surface and takes its rightful place. And at that moment, awakening ceases to be a concept and becomes a practice. Being present, taking a deep breath before reacting, choosing consciously, caring for oneself with the same zeal one has always offered to others, silencing judgment, trusting in time, celebrating the simple things. These are the paths to sustaining what has been achieved. Nothing needs to be grand to be true. Real change happens in the little things, in a conversation that ends without guilt, in a no said with love, in a pause before answering, in a tear accepted without shame. It is in these moments that the new takes root and the old dissolves forever. And if you've made it this far, something inside you has already begun to change. Perhaps subtly, perhaps silently, but it's real. Words only resonate where there is recognition. If something in this text has found a home within you, it's because the woman we're talking about already lives inside, waiting for the moment to fully reveal herself. The path back to oneself is not a straight road, but it is the only one that leads to true freedom. And there's no need to rush. Awakening is not a goal, it's a process, just one conscious step at a time. Now, if this content resonated with you, if it touched a memory, opened a clearing of understanding, or simply made you feel something, share your impression, even silently, even anonymously. Comment on what resonated with you. Tell us what changed. Let other women also find themselves in these words. Like this video if it spoke to your soul. Subscribe to the channel to continue walking with us on this path of awareness and self-discovery. Every gesture, however small it may seem, strengthens this current of lucidity that has already begun to form among us. May your step inspire others. May your silence be a seed. May your awakening transform into light for the world. And remember, you don't need to become anything. Just stop hiding who you already are.